Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil. Allah fi kulli umri yasta'in. Allah fi kulli umri amjid. Inhu Rabbi yuhibbu mu'min ladhi yusalli wa ibadatuhu wa salawatuhu min mukhlisin. Muhammadan huwa Sayyidina Makbubana inhu kana Rasulun Nabiyan. Salawatu Allah Ta'ala wa salamuhu alayhi. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Lil ikwani wa akhwati fi din. Wassalamu ala mani tabahuda. Lil ikwani wa akhwati fi Afrika wa Europa, Asia wa America wa West Indies wa kuli makan. Halin salam bikum. My dear brothers and sisters, today gives me my privilege to talk to one of my favorite heroes. And this is a man of great significance in Islam. So much so that even the disbelievers studied his tactics. And I would be remiss, again, as I always say, when we have cases like this, not to talk about our ancestral brother, the companion, one of the companions of a prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam. This man was not an ordinary man. His feats on the battlefield were legendary. Surely he was the sword of Subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no doubt about that. And you think about this, we're not talking about children playing, we're talking about grown men. When grown men can make comments about the superiority of another man and that he is receiving divine guidance in his victories from Subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know that he had to be special. And you also had to know when an empire had got to the point where they feared this man. This is one man, but his leadership abilities was legendary, which my understanding West Point is still using or studying his tactics today. So us Muslims, especially the black man and his family inside the United States, are not really up to date on many of the heroes of Islam. And we should study that because there's a lot of them, and each had their own special traits and special skills. And each one was blessed with those things. And we should learn those companions because some of them were just absolutely brilliant. But today is Khaled Ibn Al-Waleed. They call him Saif Allah Masloul. That means he was a sword of Allah and was unleashed. Now you understand what this word unleashed means. You can imagine what I mean by that. It was unleashed, and literally it was unleashed. Well, let me give my salams here to Amina. Assalamu alaikum, my dear sister. My brother Saeed. Assalamu alaikum, my dear brother. And assalamu alaikum, my dear sister Abina. And those that are sitting in the safeties of their home or wherever they're at today. And I give you warm greetings and hoping that you and your family are doing well. Okay, so we'll get into this. Anytime that you talk about the Sahaba in Arabic means the companions, you have to go back to the genesis of what has happened and what happened and how do we get to this point? Because Khalid was not who he became. He was a warrior, yes, but he did not gain this type of fame. So you have to go back and look at this. And again, I wish I was equipped to show maps, but you are equipped. You have enough knowledge to know where the present day Saudi Arabia is, and you know where Mecca. I mean, who doesn't know where Mecca is, and the Medina. And so this took place there in Mecca. And we have to understand too that at this time, the Arabs were in a very, very low state. And this is before the prophet received his prophethood. And even as he got his prophethood, their wickedness and their treachery really came out. I mean, it was perverse. And you have to understand at this time, the Arabs were warring, they were fornicating, they were drinking, they were untrustworthy to a degree. And they even had debauchery even around the Kaaba, where you circle. This has been going on since the time of Abraham, alayhi salatu wasalam. And they would have the women who were going to make their pilgrimage, they would undress them. So they would walk the around the Kaaba naked, which the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, even as a young man, he protested this and said it was not right. But they were overruled, and that's the way it was. And one of the other aspects that too was very disheartening when you read about them at this time. The Arab tribes put to death many of their girl children. When they found out it was a girl born, they buried her alive. And the Prophet ﷺ had a hadith, a pointed hadith about this. And he talked because subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him this nirma, and what was happening as this baby girl was being killed, and what she said is very, very disheartening. And so they were backward. I mean, extremely backward. And then they, even before that, they began to adopt false gods, and then they had statues and so forth and so on. So they were living in a horrendous society. And the Prophet ﷺ, he got his calling, and he began to build his the Ummah Islamiyah. And at this time, he was there was a few followers that converted to Islam, but because we got to remember something, and I'm not going to give a class on our Prophet ﷺ today, but he is an integral part of this. Before I guess he became who he was, okay, and how we got the caliphate. He had a few people around him, but the Quraysh. Now there was, different tribes, but the Quraysh became the most notable, and they had offshoots of them. There were 4 other offshoots. They were still part of Quraysh, but there was different clans. We call Qabila in Arabic. And anyway, they all became notice of Muhammad and his message, and they began to try to defeat it. As you know, you heard the stories and what has happened. And Khalid at this time was like most young men, and he was born, and the tradition in the Arabs at this time, there in that the Arabian Peninsula, we call the Jazira Arab in Arabic. They would take their young boys and send them to the desert, and there in the desert they would be seasoned in language. Yes, sir, that's right, in good classical Arabic and Quranic Arabic, and also in tactics of war and so forth and so on. So Khalid was no different. He came from a noble family. His family sent him to the desert for seasoning. Essentially, that's what it was seasoning. And then he returned basically as a man. And so at this time, he began to show his skills. He was a tall, lanky boy. But before we get deeper into the subject, I'm going to give you some things about him that is very, very interesting. And it's not jumping past everything, but I want to give you something to lay out of this man. The description of Khaled Ibn Al-Waleed. Now, I will preface this by saying, we know race, color doesn't matter in Islam. We as Black people don't put that as a precedent, but we are made to think about it since the enemies of the Black man and Muslims usually whiten our heroes. Now we know that this is common. We know this is a common fact. They whiten our heroes. Even the Moors, as I talked about, they whiten them to pointy face, bearded, pencil neck, tubab. So in situations of here of the Al Jazeera Arab, they have painted them to be literally white, but we know that's not the case because we have our ancestral brother who wrote a book about this, and he described this region, and he described the grandfather of our prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, as being coal black in color. In Saeed's program, our dear brother, he discussed this. We brought proofs about the race of people there and so forth and so on. So I won't get deeper into that. But he was described by one priest among the Romans. And this priest, this scribe, had gotten a vision. Now, the Romans were at the height, and remember, in this time, the Romans and the Persians, the Iranians as we know them today, were the powers to be. And they were colonized most of Arabia, the peninsula. They had colonized it. And so this scribe had made a comment. This is as Khalid became noticed, this priest had this roya. He started to talk about him before he even knew him. He didn't know nothing about him. He told the emperor and his court and the generals about a man. He described him pot-faced, brown-skinned, very tall, long beard, very muscular build. This is how he described him. And he says, when this man comes, they will have black banners. If you see these black banners, this is this man. Don't fight him. Him and his army is very strong. This is from the Romans talking about Khalid. Safe Allah. That's right. And one of the other things that I love about Khalid, radiallahu anhu, when he's in battle, he would say, I'm a noble warrior. This is in battle. And he's going in battle, he's there, and he's killing. I'll get into that with his sword. It was this off the charts. But he says, I am a noble warrior. I am a sword of Allah. I am Khaled Ibn Al-Waleed. This is what he said in battle. This man had no fear. So this is a backdrop of giving you some things of this man, how precious he was. He was a warrior. He was a man amongst men. When you have men literally worshiping him, this man had to be something special. I'm talking about even the Muslims themselves, and of course the Romans, and of course the Persians. The Persians became well aware of him as well. This was a man, of great importance. He was undefeated, 100 or more battles, undefeated, my brothers and sisters, undefeated. Now, let's get back to his early days. As he became taller, everybody noticed he started to have the muscling of the body. The body, he started to become muscular. He was known for his tactics of war. At this time, he was not a Muslim. But it was something funny about our ancestral brother Khalid, radiallahu anhu. At the time of the prophet got his prophethood, he never really talked against the prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam. He didn't really defend him either, but he had this thing in him that he felt not compelled to talk against the Muslims. Yes, he joined battle against them, yes, but he never talked really against them. When others made comments about the prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, as he was involved in magic and he was this and that, he never got into that banter. He never did get into it. So as he grown, he became very, very well known. So much so that he became one of the leading commanders of the Meccan army. And so now you have Khalid. He is now a full-grown bull with caftan horns, tall, muscular. And as one historian, Tubab historian, described him as ultra violent. Yes, This is what one great historian described him as being ultra violent. He, even though we're talking about thousands of years, he seemed to have fear of this man. And many still do when you talk about this man, about what he done to the Romans and what he done to the Persians. And when you hear this name, Khaled Ibn Al-Waleed, we think of pride. They think of fear, the enemy. And they try to minimize, but they cannot, because their own people wrote about Khalid because they were mesmerized about him. So now let's look at this. The Prophet now got his message. Now he opened up to declare. I won't get heavy into this because that's another class. He went out and he told his followers to declare Islam now is the religion that they're following. Khalid did not say anything for it. He didn't say anything against it. And so the Prophet ﷺ went on with his prophethood and tried to bring converts, and you know the story. And then we have another important individual in this, as I talked about, when he's one of my favorites too, and that was his nephew. That was his uncle. And his uncle also was a famed warrior. And Hamza is his name, radiallahu anhu. And I talked about him on a matter of fact, one of Khalid's, Saeed's program, and talked about how rough he was. Here's another brother, and I will give you a small segment about him. This man lived in the desert alone. This black man, he was black. He lived in the desert alone, and he hunted lions. Now, I'm sorry, my brothers and sisters. What kind of brother is this, and that had this type of power to stay in the desert by himself and hunt lions and hunt them at night? Yes, this is well documented. So as the Muslims began to make their declaration in the city, again, Khalid was quiet. He didn't say anything for or against it. But the uncle of the Prophet, ﷺ, Hamza, came rolling in as the persecution began to start inside Mecca. He come rolling in. Now you think about this. Subhanahu wa ta'ala must have sent him because he came at the right time. Now they were throwing rocks, stones, sticks, feces. Everything on the companions, the new Muslims, as they begin to go and make their declaration in Mecca, round through the cities. Through the streets of Mecca, and declare Islam as the religion. And here's come Hamza. Now they came to the Kaaba to make their speech, and one of the most wicked of the Quraysh at the time, who was anti-Islamic, anti-Prophet ﷺ, threw off the one of the companions of the Prophet who was making a speech to the people to bring them Islam. So now here's come Hamza. Hamza comes in to see what was happening. When they saw him, nobody wanted to deal with this man. Khalid knows of him. He didn't go to engage him. He didn't say anything. He stayed back. He never participated in any of the wickedness that went on for years. He never did anything. He fought battles, yes, with the Muslims, but he never entered to any of the persecution. This was what's so beautiful about this. That's why he had already Islam in his heart. So Hamza comes into the scene and people start to back up. And this now you think about this. This is a rough brother. Now he go out there to fight lions. Now what do you think? He see a man in front of him, ain't nothing. It's nothing to him. And they all know his reputation. They begin to back away. So he began to ask, look, why are you fighting them? And he asked questions. He says, why don't you let them speak? So where's the truth? That you say he's a liar, we'll let him speak. And then one of the wicked Quraysh made a comment. Then Hamza slapped him. This is one of the bigger noblemen of Quraysh. He didn't raise his sword against him because he knew he'd be defeated. So they began to walk away. And this is where this famous saying, and I always use that, when Hamza, radiallahu anhu, he said to them, and he said, Innani yakulu ma yakul. I say what my nephews say. That's right. That's what he's saying. And essentially I say and I believe what he believes. Now, Khalid at this time was still doing what he's doing. They were the Quraysh were plotting and so forth against the Muslims. And they began to persecute the Muslims, to get the weaker ones and begin to basically torture them. Okay, that was bottom line. Again, Khalid never participated. He was against that. He was against that, my brothers and sisters. So now, when we see Khalid, he's looking at this. He did not participate in this. As the Muslims jumped forward and become stronger inside Mecca, the persecution became more acute. And then the Prophet sent some of the companions to Habasha. And then here's one fateful incident that happened. When the Muslims had enough, and the Prophet ﷺ gave the order to everybody to evacuate Mecca and go to the Medina. So they began to leave. But the Quraysh said, no, you know what? No, here's what we're going to do. We're going to assassinate them out in the desert, not as they leave, but we'll get them in the open desert to assassinate them. Khalid was one of those who was sent, but he was smart. He did not go with group, and they sent these assassins, and there were about 20 of these assassins there to take out the Prophet ﷺ and the companions. But there was Hamza, whose back trail, and he, subhanahu wa ta'ala, was talking to him. He kept looking back because he felt like there was some people behind him. Suddenly, Hamza turned around and saw these assassins coming for them. So he told the others to go forward. And this brother, if I had a diagram to show you what he did to these guys, this again too is unbelievable. But here's the incident. Khalid was sitting upon a hilltop. He saw this. He did not come down to the aid of Hamza. Hamza, radiallahu, and he did not come to the aid of the assassins. He stood there and watched. And one of his favorite buddies, another companion of Prophet ﷺ, was right here with him. He asked him, he said, Khalid, what are you going to do? Khalid first grabbed his safe, the sword, but he didn't do anything. He watched. He said, no, there's a Faris, a knight in Arabic. And he's going to take care of it. And Hamza, I think, took out between 6 to 10 of these 20. And he went in between them. It was a strategy that was beautiful. And he began to take heads with one sword. He'll go from one side to the other side as he went through, because as they were coming towards him this way, here is Hamza. And he came down from a hillside to fight them. And he came in between them. So he would attack one side of the column. He would go in and begin to slash them up like a hot knife with butter. And then he'll go through them and he'll come back and circle around and do the same thing again. Khalid watched this. He didn't do anything. So now he said, I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to let this go. And they left. Now they start to notice Khalid was kind of acting bizarre. He was quiet. And they would ask him questions and he give the right answers, but he didn't have this hate for the Muslims like all of his other companions had and the Quraysh had. He didn't have that. He just didn't have this feeling. So now let's jump forward to it. As the Muslims went to Medina, now the Muslims became stronger. The Quraysh were still doing things to the Muslims. They stole their wealth. They were doing things when they catch them, they would torture some of the weak ones and so forth and so on. And so now the Prophet ﷺ was given the permission. It's time for war. After many years of persecution, this is where, again, I bring this up because our brothers in America should be well versed in this, because you have the wickedness of the anti-Muslim groups, black men and white men and Hispanics and all others who hate Islam. And they always bring up the thought and say that the Muslims are nothing but a warmongering group of people and this and that. That's not the case. This is why these histories like this should be told, especially to our brothers there in America, so they'll know. So when one of these anti-Islamic individuals come and start talking, you can say, look, this is not what happened. And you can explain the history to them, because you should. So anyway, as Subhanahu wa ta'ala finally gave a declaration for war. And the Muslims wanted this, and they got it. And Hamza was leading it at this time. The Quraysh and some other Arab tribes wanted to come now to fight. And so the Muslims got together, and the terms of war were reckoned out. Now, I'm going to give you a verse or something, because I want you to keep this in mind, because this is fitting. I listed it there, and this is in boy, here, where we, okay, now what happened here? It's 73, Surah 9, 73, I think. Boy, I have my marker here. Excuse me, my brothers and sisters. Boy, where are you at here? Oh boy, I think I can't remember what did I say? I think I had it down here, but oh no, excuse me. It's not Surah 9, it's Surah 8, Anfal, number 73. Excuse me. It's Surah 8, number 73. I have to read this because this is a black backdrop on the mindset of the Muslims and what Subhanahu wa ta'ala has told our prophet. 73, Subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the unbelievers are protectors of one another. Unless ye do this, protect each other, there will be tumult and oppression on earth and great mischief. Our brothers and sisters, if you think about what Subhanahu wa ta'ala said, this is what we have today. This enemy is here in every Muslim country, causing havoc, causing problems, not only here, around the world. Mostly, you know that the American government fits this. So Subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, you protect yourselves. But here, I want to bring this up because this is important, because this gives the backdrop on why the Muslims cling together. Because Subhanahu wa ta'ala has told them the mindset of the disbelievers against them in revelation to our prophet, والسلام. So you have to understand that. This is not blind hatred. Subhanahu wa ta'ala gave guidance to our prophet, والسلام, and he told the prophet, والسلام, in number 73, this is Surah 8, verse 73, that the unbelievers are protectors of one another. So that's the backdrop. Now, as the Muslims got, unified to fight, Khalid was sent on a mission. He did not fight the first battle of Badr. It was a decisive victory for the Muslims, and they killed many of the noble of the Quraysh. But Khalid was sent on another mission, on a trade mission, and he was not happy. But they sent him on this trade mission. So now we move forward. They won. Now there's new leadership in the Quraysh in Mecca. Abu Sufyan radiyallahu anhu became a great Muslim and warrior. He decided, this time I'm going to bring many Arab tribes together, and we were going to have another battle with the Muslims. This time Khalid was going to be in it. So the battle of Uhud came down, and Khalid, because he was noted for his sword and noted also for he was good in the bows and arrows, and he had a cavalry on horses. If anyone knows the story, what has happened here at Uhud, it was the defeat of the Muslims. But before the battle, Khalid and his cavalry was sitting back on the side, and they could see them. Hamza saw that. So he went to the prophet and said, hey, look, I see Khalid and men. He said, yes. So he sent on top of a hill, Uhud, with archers And their sole responsibility was to watch Khalid and the cavalry. That's their sole responsibility. And if they came, then they used arrows to attack. Khalid was smart. He knew that he would come, they would get cut down with those arrows. They knew this. So as the battle raged on, the Muslims began to have upper hand in the battle. Hamza was slain in this battle. That's all you know about the second battle. He was slain. And so he died. And as the Muslims began to charge in fervor because they saw Hamza was killed, they began to get, emboldened, enraged, and they began to they were outnumbered tremendously, but they began to now kill a lot of the Arab tribes who were against them, the Mushrikeen. That's what we call them, the Mushrikeen. So, but at this time as well, Khalid watched. One of the men at the top decided he wanted to get some spoils of war, because at this time, if you get spoils of war, you got riches from this. And one of the commanders said, "No, you hold your place. The prophet told you to stay." They didn't stay. So majority of the men with bow and arrow, the archers, began to leave the hill and left only a handful. Khalid saw that. Khalid turned around the hill with his cavalry and came behind the Muslims, and he began to slay them. Now, here's a big black man. Khalid was. He had a sword, a heavy sword as well, and he had other warriors behind him. They began to slash up the Muslims from behind. And the Prophet ﷺ he was injured in this as they went to retreat upon the hill. So as they began to defeat the Muslims began to retreat down the hill. They could have took them out. And Abu Sufyan asked Khalid, he says, "Why don't you go up there and get him? We got him now." He put back his sword. Yes. Again, he had the opportunity, but he didn't. He backed away. And so Abu Sufyan looked at him. He said, "Okay, Khalid, yeah, the victory belongs to you." But he was puzzled by Khalid's attitude. He could have wiped him out, but he didn't. This is how this man began to have the iman already in his heart. Yes, he fought the Muslims, but this battle here, but if something was in him, he could not go to attack and kill the Prophet ﷺ. He could not. So now the battle was won. The Quraysh and the other Arab tribes won this battle, and they went back victorious. The Muslims went back in defeat, back into the Medina, but they weren't defeated because they began to do dawah and bring other Muslims to the place. And then, of course, they had the third battle, which is the Khandaq, which is the famous where they dug the trench. And Khalid was present at that time. But this time, he did not do much because subhanahu wa ta'ala, there was a few skirmishes that went on. They dug a big Khandaq around the Medina. And this is one of the things would happen here. The Jews, remember, they were there and they were in a place called Kebar. And this is their stronghold, because the Jews, as you heard me talk about days ago, about the Jews have always lived with the Muslims. They've always lived around the Arabs. They have never been separated. They've always lived around the Arabs. And so when they didn't want to come to Islam, they began to help the Arab tribes. So anyway, the Khalid could not come and go inside the Khandaq because it was dangerous. Because they come in the Khandaq, the Muslims are sitting at the top here. They would use arrows to come down and hit the warriors as they come to attack them in the Medina. So they were going to get slaughtered. So the famous battle that happened between Ali, which was the fourth caliph, and one of the fiercest warriors among the Quraysh, and he defeated him. Khalid did not participate in that. After this defeat of this one-on-one battle, what they call Mubarasa in Arabic is what they call this. They go back to their tents to talk about this. Subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the wind. He sent the wind, a dust storm. Anybody who's has been in the desert I've had this happen to me one day when I was in Sudan. I never, and as I always say, I never want to have this ever again. The sun, when the storm comes with the sand, you can't see, and it hits you and cuts you up in the face, and so forth and so on. They had to retreat. They went back. They began to suspect now that Prophet ﷺ was a prophet, and so Khalid now began to have this kind of sadness in his heart. So what did he do? He went into the desert and stayed in the desert for a short period of time. He was married, but he went into the desert to think about what has happened. And he was not happy. And his soul was, he was not, he was unleveled. He didn't know what to think. So finally, one of his companions, who was close to him, came to him out there in the desert and asked him what was wrong. And he started to explain some things to him and whatnot. So anyway, he came back. And now the turning point comes around when there was a treaty with the Quraysh and the Muslims. They were about to ready to come into the Medina. Come into Mecca to make their pilgrimage. Now they signed a 10-year contract agreement, mithaq in Arabic, or teswiya, and that they would be in peace for 10 years. And they gave all these regulations. And I talked about this one time, I think on Saeed's program, which is a beautiful, the Prophet, he's a master at this because he's guided by Subhanahu wa ta'ala. You would think that the Quraysh had the advantage, but they didn't. And this is one of the fallacies why I said to my brothers in America in particular to learn about this, because why? When people go to enslave, or when people go to turn Muslims over, they always use this part of the history and say, oh, look, the Prophet gave his own companions back to the enemy. No. It didn't happen like that. If you understood what happened was the agreement was said that those bondsmen, if you had a father and he had his son and his son was not married yet, and he could request to have his son returned. Okay. Now, if you had slaves and so forth and so on, indentured servants and whatnot, you can ask for them to be returned. But you just can't go and say, hey, man, I want Yahya, I want Saeed, I want Muhammad and Ahmed, and I want, no, that did not happen. They were not turned over. You had to have special conditions. Again, son, if your son, and he's still not married, he's still under your roof, you had the right to ask for you to return him back to the Muslims to Mecca. So it's not as you hear the enemy say, oh, and the munafiqeen, the hypocrites, they go turn over Muslims today and they use this as an example. No, it didn't happen that way because the Prophet would not do that. And then as his position became stronger, when they violated the thing, then he put the decree in the hadith. You remember that? Remember he said in the last of his speech, he said, Muslim aku Muslim. Muslim is a brother to every Muslim. Let Islamuhu, don't surrender to him. Adulhu, to his enemy. Okay, that's what he said in Arabic in this hadith. See, so he made it clear. No, you, me, Saeed, Amina, any of the Muslims, we're equal. We're brothers. We're brothers in Islam. I cannot turn him over to the kuffar. Even if the kuffar offers you thousands and thousands of dollars, you are not to turn another Muslim over to the kuffar. This is the standing order 1400 years ago by our prophet in a hadith, authentic hadith. You don't surrender no Muslim to the kafir. Never. In this time. Now, we're not talking about, now there's some conditions, I won't get into that. But there's some conditions when you do have to do something, but that's in rare situations. But just so that the kuffar can do something to a Muslim that you don't like and you want to turn them over, you cannot do this. So my brothers and sisters, we look at it and it's this sense now you can get a picture of Khalid. Khalid is starting to sway towards the Muslims. When Khalid came to see the Muslims, to meet them, to make sure that they were not armed, because they were coming to, now remember the treaty was signed, the mithaq was signed, 10-year peace, no war, and you could not attack one another. But Khalid came from Mecca to meet them near Mecca to make sure they were not armed and there was no treachery. And so the Prophet ﷺ sent Bilal. Remember Bilal? Remember him, the first one who gave the adhan. He told him to go meet Khalid out there in front. And so he gave something that the Muslims should understand. And I talked about this before too. He gave another part. This is an issue of fiqh. You know how we're supposed to say salam alaikum, right? Well, there's some conditions to that. And Bilal established that. When Khalid came to him, he did not say salam alaikum to Khalid. He said salam lek, peace to you. He didn't say salam alaikum, okay? He did not say salam alaikum, rahmatullahi barakatuh. No, he did not. He said salam lek. This is a lesson for my brothers and sisters. When you have a hypocrite or you have a disbeliever, you're not required to give them the full words of Jannah, salam alaikum, rahmatullahi barakatuh. No, you are not. You can give him salam lek. And you're within the sunnah, because the Prophet did not correct Bilal when he did this. So you can do this. The hypocrites come around you, they want to, and you say, okay, and you fear that maybe there may be some reprisal. You just say salam lek, and that's all. You're covered. No problem. So I just wanted to give you that. So now, my brother, since we're at a point where the Muslims had been gaining strength. They now have converts coming from all over. Now, we got to remember something. The integral part of this is the Romans and the Persians. As the Romans, they were in Syria. We know it at that time as Sham, al-Sham. The Romans began to persecute the new Muslims. And what they did to them, my brothers and sisters, was outrageous. You know, the Romans were master killers. You know that. They've been in the Middle East for thousands and thousands of years. And what they did to the new Muslims was outrageous. They would gather the new Muslims and take them to a river. And they would crucify them there at the river. Crucify them, okay? And then they had them tied up and everything, and they would stab them. Right before they felt that they were ready to die, they kicked the crucifix with the Muslim on it into the river and let him drown. This is how cruel they were. Again, this is a lesson for my brothers and sisters in the United States who say that why did the Muslims fight the Romans? As though the Romans were cute little girls and we went to go fight them for no reason. You understand? They persecuted Muslims. This is cruel. You think about this. Here's a man being crucified. You remember what they said that they did. You remember, I won't get into Christian tradition. We won't get into that. But here's a man crucified on a post. He's standing, he's here. He's inches away from dying. He's been stabbed. And they kick the post, they kick the crucifix and that Muslim into the river so they'll drown. That's how cruel and vicious. They needed to get their butts kicked. And eventually they would. But that's head of the story. But I wanted to give you that backdrop because the enemy always talk against the Muslims. Said they were they were hungry for war. And they wanted blood, and they began to fight the Persians and the Romans for no reason. The Romans had no business being there. They've been there for thousands of years. They were there as conquerors, okay, occupiers. They had nothing to do with the Arab, the Jazeera Arab. They were there as conquerors, okay. So bottom line, so when they begin to persecute. The Prophet, he knew this. He knew this, what they were doing. So now, my brothers and sisters, we had a critical point here. Khalid began to now feel Islam was in his heart. One of the men of his clan, Makhzum is what they call them. One of his clans, this Quraysh, came to him. He had a letter from the Prophet ﷺ inviting Khalid radiallahu anhu to Islam. And he told him that he would be great because he already knew. He said, you'll be great in Islam. You'll be honored, which he's still honored today after 1,400 years. He told him that. Khalid pondered it. and decided he was going to become a Muslim. And so two other men came with him, companions came to the Medina. It was a big scene because this was a big kudo for the Prophet ﷺ. Here you had the greatest warrior, the most feared warrior, who was the only one who ever defeated the Prophet ﷺ, now has come to Islam. He come into Medina and they came to greet him with love and respect and honor. And so he made his entry inside the Medina. You can imagine how this was in those days. You have people coming to greet him and so forth and so on. They knew he was ready for Islam. So he comes in to meet the Prophet ﷺ. He gave his declaration before the Prophet ﷺ and some of the companions. And now he was a Muslim. And he said this declaration with authority because he was an authoritative type of man. He said, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu an Muhammadan Rasulullah. This is our declaration that we say. It's a beautiful declaration to become a Muslim. And now our brother, our ancestral brother, Khalid, was a Muslim. And during this time, he had tears in his eyes. He was remorseful because he was that kind of a man. He began to talk about how he was wrong and how he fought the Muslims. And he did something. He began to, because he was rich, he began to take all the jewels. He had ornaments, he was very rich. He had ornaments. He began to take that. He said, give this to the poor. He began to divvy out the wealth he had. He's in a tent now with the Prophet ﷺ. And then he decided to give a sword for the poor. The Prophet ﷺ stopped him and told him, this will be the sword that will fight for Islam. This is before he got his name, but he told him already that what was going to happen. So my brothers and sisters, we at this point now, Khalid radiallahu was a Muslim. Now the turmoil that has been facing him all these years, as the Muslims were climbing up, he now is gone. He was Muslim in his heart from the beginning because he never talked against the Muslims. And he never, he stayed away from that. He never persecuted any Muslims. He engaged in battle, yes. But now he's a Muslim. And so that's where we're at so far. And I'm going to stop here a little bit. And let me see here what my brother Khalid had to say here. Okay. Bina, my dear sister, she said, yes. They had really strong brothers that they were really, how could I say, extraordinary. Hamza, radiallahu anhu, and Khalid were some of the most fierce warriors that the Muslims ever had. And so, yes, these brothers were special, and they were guided by subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I take special notice of my brother Hamza because you reason this in your mind, my brothers and sisters. Now you know the open desert, okay? You know the open desert, and in that area the lions were vicious, and they had vicious dogs too. They had wolves there too. There were man eaters as well, and they had lions. That's right. And the lions were waylay. I mean, they were caravans. I mean, they were something else. This brother was hunting them in the desert by himself. And he didn't have a 45. He didn't have no Uzi. He didn't have no AK-47. He just had bow and arrow and his sword. And this is what he did to hunt them. So you see, they had some strong brothers in those days. And they had to be something special in order for them to do what they did. So, assalamu alaikum, my dear brother Isaac. Now, our brother Khalid is a Muslim. And he began to conduct his prayers. but his heart was still saddened. You know why? Because his wife was still in Mecca. He loved his wife dearly, and she became a great Muslimah. And she was a beautiful woman, but she was kind and she was very considerate. She was a good wife even before Islam. And she encouraged him to go to see the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, before he converted, because she knew because that's her husband. She knows him. So the Khalid didn't rest. He didn't complain either, but something was missing in his heart, his wife. So his brother surprised Khalid. He went to go get her, and he brought her back to the Medina to join her husband Khalid, radiallahu anhu. That's a beautiful part of the story as well. And she began to take residence as a Muslimah and as his wife. And so now Khalid was whole now. He had everything. He had his wife. Now he has Islam. And the Muslims now are going to be embarked in some serious battles. The Prophet ﷺ knew what was happening. And he wanted to make sure that these forces, the Persians and the Romans, would be dealt with because they were a serious adversary. You got to remember that, my brothers and sisters. They were a serious adversary. The Romans have been a war machine for how many centuries? They were something, and they were killers. They were man killers. Bottom line, they were built for war, and that's what they did. So the Prophet ﷺ had guidance from Subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was going to take his shot at them, but he already knew the outcome because Subhanahu wa ta'ala told him, and he had told the companions of an incident. This is bizarre. Now you can imagine here's the companions are sitting there listening to the Prophet talk about something about Persia, and he was talking about something that the king of Persia had at this time. He said that one man who will bring this back will wear it in front and parade around in the city of Medina with it. And the companions had to think, and they said, wow, this is incredible. They never doubted the Prophet, no, but they knew he was guided by Subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they believed him. And it happened, my brothers and sisters. It happened. That's right. But that's way ahead of the story. Now, the Prophet, ﷺ, said, I'm going to start to deal with the Romans. Khalid was asked to participate. Now, everybody knew Khalid's reputation, but he was not leading the army at this time. 3 famous Sahaba were asked to lead the Muslims against the Romans. And I will stop a little bit here because I want to give you a verse again in Surah 8, number 60, 64, 65, and 66. Subhanahu wa ta'ala, this chapter here, I told many times before, is one of my favorite. But don't read into it because we know jihad. Not the jihad of the criminal Muslims that are doing today. We're not talking about the criminal Muslims, you know who I'm talking about, who are doing unlawful things. We're not talking about that. That's not jihad. I told you that's criminal. Here, Subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving some guidance to the Muslims. 64, and this is Surah 8. This is why they call it the Surah Jihad. Surah Jihad. This is Anfal. Surah Anfal is called Surah Jihad. The Prophet, here's what Subhanahu wa ta'ala told the Prophet. O Prophet, sufficient unto thee is Allah, unto thee, and unto those who follow thee among the believers. Now, that's a lesson for all of us in one sense. This is a direction to our Prophet, ﷺ. But if you are a believer, you believe in your Prophet, then things will happen. Okay, because there's what we call wa'da Allah lil mu'mineen, the promise of Subhanahu wa ta'ala to the believers. This is true. You should always mimic this by saying this and believing it and put this in your heart. it's going to happen. Even if you're under calamities, you're sick, even something has happened to you, even if the enemies are coming after you, you always put that this wa'da Allah lil mu'mineen is coming. It's coming. It's Khalid, meaning it's coming. It's coming. So now the prophet says in 60, now subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the prophet, here we got the formula for the Muslims. As I explained, I think a couple of weeks ago, the Muslims are ordered to fight even when their forces are minimal. He gave a ratio, the prophet, the subhanahu wa ta'ala, on how the Muslims, because as I explained, one Muslim equals to 10 disbelievers. This is from subhanahu wa ta'ala. One rightful Muslim. I ain't talking about the hypocrite. I'm talking about the rightful Muslims, guided Muslims. He's worth 10 disbelievers. So here, subhanahu wa ta'ala talks in 65, again, Surah 8 and number 65, subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O prophet, rouse the believers to fight. If there are 20 amongst you, patient and persevering, they will vanquish 200. See the ratio? If there's 20 Muslims, if there's 200 disbelievers, subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them victory. You see the ratio? 20 against 200. They will vanquish 200. If 100, they will vanquish 1,000. There's 100 Muslims, 1,000 disbelievers. They will conquer them. For these are the people without understanding. Meaning, again, the disbelievers are misguided. Okay, we talking about, we won't get into this because, that's a class in itself. But we know that we know what has happened to their books and so forth, so they're misguided. And subhanahu wa ta'ala has warned them. He has chastised the Jews and the Christians and Muslims as well in the Quran. I've talked about this before. But here, he gave you the first formula on the Muslims. Khalid used this when they did their scouting, when they about ready to fight. He realized that if there were 10,000, he needed between 500 to 1,000 Muslims to fight because they would get victory. That's all he needed. As a matter of fact, Khalid sometimes didn't even want that amount of number. He wanted 50 to 100. But he was overruled and told, no, you follow this formula. So he did. Now, 66, again, Surah 8, verse 66, subhanahu wa ta'ala says, for the present, Allah had lightened your task, for he knoweth that there is a weak spot in you. But even so, if there are 100 of you, patient and persevering, they will vanquish 200. If 1,000, they will vanquish 2,000 with the leave of subhanahu wa ta'ala, for Allah is with those who patiently persevere. This is a formula, my brothers and sisters, that the Muslims should use. Now, we know in modern day time, I don't really call this a jihad. When someone calls for jihad and you don't fight no more, because these days it was a man's battle where you fought man to man, okay? You dealt with your enemy man to man. Nowadays, everybody sits behind 6, 7, 8 kilometers behind howitzers and tanks, and they shoot bombs, and then they have aerial madness from the sky dropping bombs. That's not this. There's no jihad in that. There's no more man-to-man competition and conflict. See, they didn't have that. It's over. So now I don't know. When someone calls it jihad, I have to laugh sometimes. And I said, well, why are they calling it jihad? Because there's no fighting. The fighting really is long rifles who can kill an enemy, a kilometer away. There's no more hand-to-hand combat. See, so I don't know what kind of jihad this is. But anyway, that's another story. This is my personal opinion, what I'm saying. So we have the formula now for the Muslims. And I'm getting ready to close here because I'll pick this up in another day. But I want to now give you the picture. The Muslims are getting ready to take the battle to the Romans. Now, our enemies will say, oh, they're warmongers. Let's look at it this way. Brothers and sisters from Compton and Long Beach, or LA in particular. Say if you had some foreigners come in, okay, I'm not going to use Mexico, for instance. I won't use them, for instance. But I'll say that they say it's the Russians. The Russians came in and they began to occupy Compton, Long Beach, and LA in general. And their occupation was brutal. You remember the documents that was written during the time of Berbers. That's another story. That's the Muslims way ahead. Now this is another 500 years in the future. They recorded that the Romans were having 100 babies by Muslim women per month. Now you understand why Syria, Jordan, and those areas, why what we call the White Arab. Now you know where that came from. It came from the Romans, right? You know where that came from because you got to think about it. The Romans were having 100 Muslim women were having babies by the Tuba Romans. 100 per month was the count. Now you understand why we in Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, they're so white because their daddy were Romans. And that's why they're white. That's why we call them white Arabs and so forth and so on. That's those people, not the Saudis. The real Saudis are black. Anybody knows that. Saeed has been there. The real Saudis are black and brown skinned. That they're the original Saudis. But that's another story altogether. So now I gave you that analogy. The Romans were a brutal occupier. Now, isn't it human nature that I live in Compton? If the Russians come in there, I'm going to deal with them. I'm going to fight them any way I can to drive them out. So why should the Muslims sit there and allow the Romans to kill them at will? This is what the Tuba crazy racist historians have said, and CNN and everything else. They said we're warmongers. We went to go fight the Romans for no reason, or the Persians. Come on, they occupy. Again, the Russians come to occupy Compton. The brothers are going to deal with that. You know that. The brothers are not going to sit there and say, hey, man, and look at these two Bob come in and roll in on them. And then they're going to say, hey, okay, and I'm not going to fight you back. The brothers are going to deal with them, right? In Long Beach, Compton, where I'm from, I know the brothers, they're going to have at it. I know that. The Romans in the situation, the Muslims said the same thing. You're here in the Arab, Jazeera Arab, the peninsula, the Arabs. Your days are numbered. You have brutally occupied this land. Now you are killing Muslims. I'm coming after you. Now you remember something. The Prophet sent Hercules, the emperor at that time, a letter. There was 3 letters. I won't get into that. That's the story of the Prophet. But he sent one to the Roman emperor. The Roman emperor knew that his days was numbered because why? 2 factors. One is the priest told him, don't fight this army that's going to come with black banners. And there'll be a man leading it who's tall, heavily muscled, potted face, brown skin, and a big beard. Don't fight them. That's the first. Second, the letter. The letter was from the Prophet asking him to come to Islam. He knew his days was numbered. He even told the emissaries that were there, the Muslims. That's a different story, again, about the Prophet. But one of the Sahaba came there, was ordered by Hercules to come to talk about the Prophet. So now we at this point, my brothers and sisters, the fighting is going to begin. And there's going to be some serious hand-to-hand combat between the Muslims and the Romans. And these battles were vicious, and they are one for the ages. And many military strategists have studied, especially one of the battles I'll talk about in the future here, inshallah ta'ala. But this strategy that was used by the Romans and by Khalid, is still being studied today. I'll get to this part here. The Romans now begin to say, okay, we're not going to lose Syria, because remember, Syria, Sham, Syria, if you see the map, Saudi Arabia, you see Syria. That's where they're at. They're not going to, he knows his days is numbered, but he said, look, okay, but I'm going to fight them anyway. So he began to have his little battle plan. Khalid, and now I will close after I give you this part of it, because I don't want to be too much longer. Khalid was now, he was not a conscript, but he was inside and he was just a regular warrior. Remember, I said 3 famous Sahaba were tasked to go to do the battle plan. So now the Romans came, and at this time, there were approximately, if I remember right, about 15,000 to 20,000 Muslims fighting 100,000 Romans. This is one of the first battles. And they sent one of their men to come spy on the Romans to see their strength. He came back and gave them a bleak report and told how many they had. The 3 companions then decided, okay, we're going to have Nasr or Shahada, in Arabic meaning we're going to have victory or we're going to have the death of a martyr. This is what they said in Arabic. This is now what they were saying. Remember, Khalid now was this regular soldier, but Khalid was thinking how he can defeat this greater army. At that time, nobody talked to him. Because he was new to Islam. He had to prove himself. But nobody questioned Khalid as far as his bravery and his skill at fighting. Nobody did. Here's one miracle. I have to give this to you, my brothers and sisters. During this battle, okay, now battle started. Subhanahu wa ta'ala came to the Prophet ﷺ and gave him the vision of the battle. That's right. It's recorded, my brothers and sisters. It's recorded. He gave blow by blow. He was not even there. He was back in the Medina. So, as the first companion with one of the emirs fell, the Prophet sent one out and said, one of our commanders just fell. When the second commander fell, he announced it again. At the time it happened, not 1 week later, at the time it happened. The third fell, and he reported it to, because everybody's sitting there waiting for the news. They're waiting for because they didn't have, we didn't have no fax machines. We didn't have no cell phones. We didn't have no Blackberries, or anything like this, or Samsung. They didn't have that in those days. So the Prophet was given this miracle. So he saw the Muslims in a dire strait at this time. Now, the Muslims were in a kind of disarray. Their spirits were still high, but they didn't know, they lost their commanders. So one of the famous Sahaba began to ask around, who's going to take the banner and who's going to lead the Muslims? Khalid said, I'm going to do it. And he did. My brothers and sisters, when he took the banner and he began to lead the Muslims, it's recorded what he had done. He broke six swords on the heads of the Romans. He was cutting them up in pieces as he began to fight them. Now it's like something overtook him. He was already fighting. Yes, now he's the leader of the Muslim army, and something happened to our brother. And people report how they start to see him like, yes, he's human, yes, but they knew something happened. Something was going on with him. He broke 6 swords on the head because he was a tall brother. He would use the knife, the safe, and he would crack their helmet, and he broke 6 swords. And he began to cut up the Romans like hot butter going through knife. So this battle raged on for a while, and Khalid still was leading Muslims. And then he devised a plan. He said, okay, what I'm going to do now is, they broke up because, at nighttime they stopped. The Roman commander began to see, and Khalid got to thinking. Subhanahu wa ta'ala began to help him. He said, okay, look, why don't we look like we're going to have reinforcements? So when the reinforcements looked like reinforcements was happening when it wasn't. The men were ordered to get up and use their horses to make it appear dust coming, like the Muslims are coming to reinforce. The Romans already had enough. And then when they see the reinforcements, the general said, okay, let's go back. So they went back. Khalid actually saved the Muslims and they won. And he returned back to the Medina. Some of the people said that at this time, Khalid was a coward. But the prophet said, I don't want to hear this kind of talk, because he began to relay what happened in the battle. And during this time is when the prophet named him Saif Allah, and now declared that sword to be the sword of Allah, and it was unleashed. It was unleashed. And if you read what he done in this battle, the first battle with the Romans, this was a serious, serious brother in the trenches, hand-to-hand combat. This is man to man. He was no punk. He dealt with the enemy as subhanahu wa ta'ala is ordered in the Quran. He dealt with the enemy, the disbelievers, as they should be dealt with. They killed their brothers. He was ordered on the Prophet, والسلام, subhanahu wa ta'ala was his Lord. And he was carrying now the sword of Allah, and he dealt with the Romans in such a way. And that's a little head of the story. But now the prophet gave him his title. So my brothers and sisters, I'm a little long today, but I had to give you this story about this warrior, this special human being. His faith in subhanahu wa ta'ala is off the charts. His sword was off the charts. He was a devoted Muslim, and he was the commander of the Muslims. His feats are still talked about 1400 years later. There's hundreds of books been written still about him and his exploits. My brothers and sisters, when we talk about emulating, why don't we emulate him? We talk about naming our children, our brothers now. I'm talking about our man children, Khalid. It means eternal in Arabic. You name him after this Sahaba, this warrior. So, my brothers and sisters, I'm going to close today with this, and I will pick up again, inshallah, ta'ala, in a couple of days. And I want to leave you with this, because this is a beautiful story of Islam, and particular for our brothers in the United States, because you're around the enemy so much, and there's so much Islamic phobia. They always talk against the Muslims for being warlike, but you can explain the story why the Muslims fought the Romans. And I gave you that analogy, my brothers and sisters, like the Russians are coming into Compton or Long Beach. They come into the hood and they came in to occupy it. The brothers had enough. They said, no, we're going to deal with you. We're going to drive you out. That's what the Muslims said they were going to do. The same thing. It's a human right and human nature to do that. Man will do that. You occupy his land. You take his women, and they have babies by this enemy. So you're going to start to deal with them. This is what the Muslims did. So you explain that when you hear this type of talk, or you're in school or something, you can explain the story to explain why the Muslims fought the Romans and drove them out. So with that said, I will give you some of the quotes, our brother, and I will close. One of the quotes I like is the Prophet ﷺ explained to him what to say when there's bartering going on between the enemy and the Muslims before they fight. Subhanahu wa ta'ala gave orders to the Prophet. The Prophet gave orders to the commanders to explain to them what they should say before they battle. Okay? One of them, Khalid said, and he was taught this, he gave this now, this is to Hercules, to the Romans when he first said this. submit to Islam to be safe, or agree to payment of a jizya. This is the three famous conditions of the Muslims which they give to the disbelieving armies before battle. Second, and you and your people will be under my protection. The first condition, you give a tax. This is the Prophet taught him this. Second, or else you will have yourself to blame for consequences, for bringing the men who desire death as ardent as you desire life. He was scaring them to say the Muslims have no fear of death. The three famous conditions is jizya. Okay, you come to Islam first, excuse me. Second is you pay a tax. Third, if you say no to both of these, the first two, then it's the safe, the sword, the fight. So this is the conditions that the Muslims lay. So it's not warmongering. Again, they even tried to give a way out so they don't have to fight, preserve mankind. But they gave these conditions, and they said no to it. Then they had to fight. They had to the safe. They had to fight the sword, which they did. So, my brothers and sisters, I will conclude with that today. And I see here Amina said there's no place on his body. Yes, he was talking on his deathbed. That's the head of the story. He was talking about the sword. That every part on his body there was some wound from a sword. That's how many battles he fought. They say he fought 100 battles and he was victorious in every single one of them as a Muslim. That's very interesting. He never suffered defeat. And so that's about it. I see here. So my dear brothers and sisters, thank you, my brother Isaac for showing up, and my brother Saeed for showing up as well, and sister Amina, and those who may look at this in the future. I love the story of Khalid radiallahu anhu, and I am honored to give it. So I will close with that, and check me out in a couple of days as I finish this story, this rewarding story of a Sahaba and a famous warrior that's still being studied and honored today, Khaled Ibn Al-Waleed. So I'll leave you with the beautiful words of Jinnah. Assalamu alaikum, rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.